everyone. Mr. James O'Neill here, speaker and owner of Mastery for All. Mastery for All partners with school districts to bring mastery of mathematics through professional development, through coaching, and through consulting. I want to see everybody master mathematics, specifically our Black boys who have historically not mastered it in this space. And so one day I was literally on LinkedIn and there was this article titled, "Is Math a Racist Subject?" And I read that article and I said, I want to do a podcast on that. And so I'm bringing in my friends, people that I've met in the space, people that actually have reached out to me and say, hey, I want to speak to this subject about equity. And so I did not prompt them in their answers. They are literally speaking from their experiences, from the research as it relates to equitable instruction in mathematics. So I want you to sit tight. I want you to have an open mind, an open heart, an open spirit to listen and to hear these experts speak to this subject. Is math a racist subject? And I'm going to see you on the other side. Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Mr. James O'Neill here with another episode of Is Math a Racist Subject? This is episode 8, and joining me today is Mr. Richard Bobinchuck. Richard, how you doing today, sir?
Doing good. Thank you for having me, James.
Yeah, buddy. I knew that when I was doing this podcast, I know we met and we have facilitated together. We've known each other for a little bit now. And so I was like, I want to get your voice on this podcast. And so I'm super glad that you decided to come on and lift up your expertise. As you all already know, anytime I bring anyone on the podcast, I would just want to introduce them to you all to let you know about their expertise and their brilliance in this space, and that I did not just pick up anybody and ask them to speak to this subject. I'm talking to people that are well-versed and passionate about math education. So here we are. Richard Bobinchuck is a K-12 educational consultant with 15 years of experience at all levels. He has been leading school improvement initiatives for the past 10 years, where he specializes in helping school leaders develop a culture that promotes educational equity. Love that. Richard has earned his MST in mathematics from Florida Atlantic University and his MED in educational leadership from American College of Education. You can find him on Instagram. And Richard, what's your Instagram? So you can just drop it out there for everybody.
I'm at the Hollywood Homesteader.
Hollywood Homesteader. All right. And so everybody, welcome Richard to the show. And Richard, I'm glad that you're here with us today.
No, I'm very happy to be here, James. I really appreciate you reaching out to me and giving me an opportunity to kind of have a conversation with you today around a topic that really resonates with me in terms of the work that I've done in the past and the work that I'm currently doing now. That topic, is math a racist subject? It really hit me a little bit, made me think. The title was very controversial at first when I started reading it. And I know that when people go through and hear that title, they might be a little misled in terms of what that means. So right. I'm really looking forward to diving into it.
Well, you already started the conversation, Richard. Like, it's like you're already ready. So let me just ask you, is math a racist subject based upon your experience, based upon your research, based upon everything that you're bringing today? I always start off asking with this question: is it a racist subject?
Well, mathematics in general, right? When we think about the historical components of mathematics, a lot of our Black and brown historians have added so much to mathematics, and the subject itself isn't inherently racist. However, we know that there's a lot of certain circumstances and factors that get involved in terms of the instruction that our students receive as we think about the impacts of society, such as systemic racism. Some of those things definitely cause the instruction that our students will receive to not be the same that all students receive. Mm-hmm. It really affects how math is taught and learned for our white, Black, and brown students.
So in essence, you're saying the way we have approached mathematics has been inequitable. Is that what you're saying?
So there's a lot of practices that we've adopted. So when I first learned mathematics, it was very, rote memorization, a lot of drill and kill, right? Practice. Mm-hmm. But as we've evolved, they got to become more problem solvers and more mathematizers, and not just the answer getting component of it. And a lot of times teachers will walk into a class with their notion of how mathematics should be taught and not really bringing into that cultural aspect of it, of how do I make connections with my students to make sure that they're receiving the highest quality instruction possible.
Okay. And so when I hear you say that, because when you talk about how math was presented, I was in the same classroom where it was more procedural, a drilling kill, like you do 20 of the same problems, 30 problems, and it was like do all the evens or do all the odds, same thing over and over again. And there wasn't this lack of connection. So my question to you, like you talk about just briefly about, connecting it to the things our kids are experiencing, what their culture and everything. Why is that important? And how does that even connect with the question I'm asking, is math a racist subject?
Well, it's important to make those connections with our students because you want to make the mathematics real for them. How are they going to experience math in their everyday lives?
Mm-hmm.
When you and I worked together at the Standards Institute, we had that great problem about the corner store. And if you live in the community where your students are, you can make quick connections with them. You can talk about how like the development of a lot of the properties and a lot of these small community stores have just up and changed. Like it's not the way that it used to be in the past. And so having that historical background of your community and talking to your students, it really builds that relationship with your students. And the relationships by far is the most important thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
If students trust you and believe that you have their best interest at heart, they're going to listen to you and they're going to try to learn as best they can, right? Especially when things get challenging. So they're really going to make that effort. And in my experience, ensuring that all students, regardless of race, have opportunities to master mathematics. And this really requires a focus on individual instruction. Culturally responsive teaching is a huge piece, and able to provide that access to the resource that provides those students with the support that they need to learn
Mm-hmm.
the math is also quintessential. This includes providing students with, the necessary tools, quality textbooks, high quality instructional materials that are aligned to the standards. And we also want to make sure that we're addressing any learning barriers that might be present with our students. And that really gets into the concept, having those conversations with your students. How are they, what's their best learning style? Are they kinesthetic? Are they more visual? Are they auditory? Those are the things that you need to know about your students to understand how you can best connect with them.
And I love what you're saying, specifically about bringing student cultures in and how it makes the relevance, brings the math to the connection. They see it in the real world. There's more buy-in. We know that our brains, the way we learn, the way we retain things is that if there's connection, if there's a purpose or behind it, we're more prone to remember it. We're more prone to connect it to real life. That makes it relevant. That means it's not just, it's staying in our long-term memory as opposed to right now working memory. And so like when I hear you talk about that, I want you to dive more into, because you talk about giving kids access to high quality materials. And I know we've had conversations as far as many times not everybody gets those high quality materials. There are decisions being made from teachers, districts, depending on where you're at. I know I've heard so many people quote the fact that I can tell you about your educational experience looking at your zip code. And so my next question is like, what has been your experience in making sure that all races master mathematics?
Well, it's really important to know your content standards. So whatever state that you live in, you have, a set of standards that you need to follow, right? Our course descriptions and what's expected to be delivered in that class. As we think about math, we know that there's a lot of stuff that's been taken away from some of our courses. So if you think about like logic and set theory, things like that's kind of been removed. It's been brought back in. Things been moved from one grade level to the next. So being able to make those connections from one grade level to the next is extremely important. And it all boils down to knowing your standards, right? The progression of one grade, how a concept will grow and develop from one to the next. That's a huge piece to make those connections for students, because as they come in, what manipulatives they might have seen or potentially had an opportunity to experience in those previous grade levels. And how can I make those connections to them? The diagrams, those models, modeling with the mathematics, those are important pieces that we need to leverage because we want to build that conceptual understanding. And like I said, we learn in a more procedural approach. And a lot of times teachers will rush to that procedural skill and fluency and neglect that conceptual side. And what that does is it promotes this idea of answer getting, and students that where, memorization of my multiplication facts might fall short and fail them, like what do they have to fall back onto? If they don't have a conceptual foundation, then there's no other skills. It's either you know it or you don't. And we kind of draw that line in the sand. So it's extremely important to know your standards. That's by far the most important thing that we can do as educators, is be as versed as we can with the language of our standards, knowing what the expectations are. And then when we get those materials that we know sometimes just aren't fully aligned, what can we do to take that next step, to find materials that are out there? Maybe it's in, an open up resource or in some other, OER resource that's out there.
Yeah.
EdReports is going to give you the best of the best in terms of those green alignments so that you know what materials you have access to. And again, some of them are free. You just need to sign up with your email and you're going to have access to a full bezel of materials that you can use to deliver that content to your students.
And so even as I hear you say, like, knowing your content, knowing where kids are coming from, knowing where to go to help them make the connections, or if it's not in the curriculum, why is that an equity move? Why is knowing the content, knowing where kids are coming from, where they're going, how is that promoting equity in the space of math education?
Well, that's going to provide prime opportunity for scaffolding, right? Not that just in case scaffolding, but that just in time scaffolding. Because we know historically when you teach a specific concept, and I always think about, my solving 1 and 2 step equations. If I do x minus 1 and then 1 minus x, students are going to do completely different things. They just follow that procedural skill. But when you switch it around, do they truly understand what's happening there? Is that conceptual understanding there? So that's why it's so important to know your content standards and being able to make those connections, because that's where the scaffolds are going to come into play. That's where you're going to be able to provide that support to be sure that you're meeting every student's need at any given moment. And that's where that equity piece comes in, because you're providing students access to the grade level content when and just in time when it's needed, right? Not just in case.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And I love how you join and brought together like the knowing your content to support your kids. And I know research there's so much research out there that talks about in communities where there are high levels of Black and brown students, the teachers are many times novices before those students. And many times they're just starting out in their career. They're not a high case of veteran teachers. We know that there's a lot of turnover. And so I remember literally coming out of school, and I had started a club at my school, and the boys that I was supporting, and I saw their grades slipping, and they literally said, "Mr. O'Neill, we haven't had a consistent teacher. Like, the reason why I'm not as great as I feel like I could be in math is because like our teacher left, and then we got a sub, and then they left." And so like when you think about that turnover and not always having someone who has content knowledge, it's like, well, you can only be as great as what you're exposed to, right? Where teachers are able to scaffold and, like you said, bringing those just-in-time supports to close that gap in a community that many times don't have veteran teachers like that. So I love how you made a case for that, because it's huge. And so like when I think about that, and I think about my boys that I started the club at my school, I always, I'm passionate, and people that know and follow me know that I believe in mastery for all by supporting the mastery of all, by highlighting the brilliance of our Black boys, because many times if any statistic is shown of who's being proficient, who's not being proficient, it is usually the lowest scoring demographic are our Black male students. So as I think about that, I always ask people, why do you believe, in your experience and your research and however you've seen this, why do you believe historically our Black boys have not done great in mathematics?
Well, just speaking on the data and what we've seen historically, right, our Black boys have always scored lowest in their proficiency of mathematics. And this is due to a combination of factors from what I've seen. A lack of access to quality education, right? Lack of access to quality instruction, cultural biases, right? If you could even have a teacher in there that knows their content, but there's biases that exist with that teacher, right? That limited exposure to opportunities that encourage math proficiency, right? And those stereotypes and those negative perceptions that teachers might have, are definitely going to play a fact into that, right? When we think about mathematics itself, even the students themselves don't really have that mathematical confidence in them. And that
Yeah.
also leads to that low math proficiency scores among our Black boys. NCTM, they're a publication they put out called the Principles to Action, right? Ensuring mathematical success for all is a really great resource to tap into. When I read that and I think about the conversation that we're having now, we think about the confidence that students have. And there's so much in there. And they talk about the lack of self-confidence that our students have, especially as they start to develop that math identity. And when we think about that, it sometimes goes far beyond like just the grasp for the content or the ability to understand it. Sometimes they walk in there and just say, well, you know what? I'm never going to understand it. There's no hope for me.
Yeah.
And they view math as, I don't want to say something for the privilege, but really it's only for those mathematical geniuses, right? They even discuss this in their book. They talk about, the parents even unwillingly just reinforce the notion of low expectations and low performance in mathematics. And they claim it and they call it like that genetic destiny. The parents will say, well, you know what? I was never good in math either. So like that right there is already stacking the students up for just, hey, my mom and my dad, they said they weren't good. So it's okay for me not to be good in math, right? And then the educators will even reinforce that, with those misconceptions of students, because what do? We get students, we look at their historical scores. We go through and say, oh, well, this student right here was a level 1. Without even knowing the paper trail on that student, without even knowing the experiences that student had. We just look at test scores and say, well, look, this student's a level 1. So I'm going to put them in those low level groups, my level 1 groups. And they're going to get that remedial math because that's how they scored before they even know the student's first and last name, right? They're already putting in those things. And they're right there. You're letting the students know, look, this is the group of students that can do math. And this is the group of students that can't do math. You students that can do it, look at this activity that you're going to get, while the other students are going back to the drill and kill mathematics. So, it really comes down to the belief of the teachers and also trying to break those preconceived notions, those historical, borders that exist that we're trying to get across in order to provide students access at all grade levels, regardless of it.
You said a couple of things that I was writing down. That triggered me that I'm going to get you to expound a little bit more on. One of the things that you talked about was confidence. I'm just going to give you all 3 of them. We're going to just unpack them as well. Another thing that you talked about was what teachers honestly believe about their kids and unpacking that. And when I think about that, I always tell people, it takes disruption to change mindsets, and so I'll ask you, like, what do we need to disrupt? How do we disrupt mindsets? Because honestly, Richard, if I walked outside every day and it was raining, it rained Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. What happens when I walk out on Friday? I'm expecting rain, and so we see the same data points over and over again. We are being conditioned to believe that this is the way things are. And so in order for that to be shaken up, like, I literally have to believe that the sun is going to shine even in the midst of the rain, and seeing that and actually going and shaking up my world to actually experience that. That's a whole nother story. So we'll look at that. But even while you were talking, and I'm going to start with this one, I'm going to start backwards and work forward. While you were talking, you said, like, math at times can be seen for the privilege. And immediately I thought about Lisa Delpit's book, Multiplication is for White People. And I remember reading that and feeling like in my space as a little Black boy, I literally felt like, as I was in these, not invited to these honors classes and not being in these spaces, that wasn't for me. Right? Like, we didn't do that. Like, we are not honors material. We are bubble kids. We are kids that are always on the cusp. We are the ones that always need to be remediated. So my question to you, even as a white male in this space, like, how did you break this notion? Because everybody's exposed to it, right? How did you break the belief that, no, everybody can do math, despite necessarily what you've experienced, based upon race, based upon sex, or whatever like that? Those individuals that seem to always be invited or look like they were the elitists, many times white males in general in this space. How did you break free from that?
Well, when I first started teaching, I taught Algebra 1B. And for those that don't know, that is a historical class for repeaters, right? The first semester, they're taking the second half of an algebra course. meaning they probably didn't perform well in the previous year.
Right,
And
right.
algebra 1A, 1B is already a broken off into two pieces, right? Traditionally, you take algebra in 1 year. Well, now they have it broken up first semester 1A, second semester 1B, and we were on the block schedule. So, you're getting a full year of content in half a year. So that was kind of how this was structured. So my experience as a first year teacher, not having education as my background, right? I came in with a computer information systems. I could take
Okay.
apart a computer, I could build it. Should have been mining Bitcoin in college instead of playing computer games and building laptops. But you get the idea.
Right.
So, I cut my teeth with those students and learned really quick that the messages or what I learned in terms of, hey, this student, got to watch out for him, you got to watch out for them, right? Because of behavior. Behavior isn't an indicator of intellect, right? Behavior
That's
is
so good, Richard. That's
right?
really good.
It's an indicator of unengaged, right? And students
Yeah.
that'll act out is because either A, they want attention, right? Because self-esteem plays a big role in our students. And we don't think about the brain science behind teaching and learning. So how do I engage my students? How do I make them feel confident? How do I make them feel welcomed in this space, right? You got to get to know your students. That's the
Right.
first thing. How do I engage them? Well, it's not just making fun little math games and activities. You got to provide them opportunity and let them know that you're going to be there for them. So I always try to provide, and it's very hard to do a lot of one-on-one for your students, especially as you think about a group of students who are historically not performed well in math and have low mathematical confidence already.
Yeah.
Just show me something. Show me what you think you know, right? As I go through and model lessons, I give them that opportunity to take notes and then try it themselves, right? And then I walk around and check, okay, how did you do it? Let me see something. I would always kind of do my bell ringers or my do nows as a lead in to the lesson of the day. So if it's, solving equations, combining like terms, well, I did things with the variables and things like that so that they could see, oh, these are similar. So they would come together. Now I can go through and talk about the mathematics behind it because they've already identified, oh, these things look the same. These things are going to go together. Now we talk about the math that goes along with it. So providing them that opportunity where, those not low ceilings. Totally lost it. The low stress environment style questions, right? The low floor, high ceiling type questions where if you think about like which one doesn't belong, things like that, where there's no real right or wrong answer, but it just gets them in there having conversations around the mathematics.
So do you believe like because you did not walk from an educational degree, like you didn't have that background, like you were more open to try things and to see what your students were able to do? Do you attribute that to why you didn't walk into this closed environment, be like, oh, well, these kids are labeled this or these kids or whatever like that? Is that what you're saying?
So I think what was for me is not having that educational background coupled with the fact that I coached wrestling as well. So
okay,
I brought that coach mindset into it. Like whenever I'm training my team members, I show them, let them show me, and then you get in there and get your hands dirty with them, right? So it's not just, here's your work, get to going on it. I'm going to sit at the desk and grade papers. It doesn't work like that, right?
Yeah.
It is by far one of the hardest professions that there is out there in terms of education, right? Like it's very challenging, but the satisfaction is far superior than anything else, right? You can close $1 million sales and you'll never get the same satisfaction of seeing a student that struggles with mathematics to finally get it, right? To know that you help them break that preconceived notion, to get out of that lack of confidence that they had around mathematics and feel good to say, hey, you know what? I can do this. I can learn math. And now they can take that and run with it. As a teaching ninth grade students, when they hit that mark, then look, now you can go to geometry and algebra 2 and then to some of the higher level mathematics. You're not just going to go pre-algebra, algebra, liberal arts geometry, right? You're not just going to go to just the basic minimum requirements for graduation and that's going to be it for you. College is an option, whether it be a local community college or if it's going to be, an Ivy League college. There is that opportunity and you're not limited by your confidence, and having students build that confidence is extremely important.
You are definitely hitting on the latter part of what I wanted you to unpack is how do we build that confidence? But because it's funny that this word is really strong with you today. I literally met with Dr. Joe Davis. He's the superintendent over Ferguson, and he's a former math teacher. He's definitely like really strong in building his district as it relates to math. And he just talked about how confidence is built in mathematics, like the risk taking that you take when you're just like, well, I'm gonna try this, or I'm gonna see if this works. That didn't work. Let me try this. Oh, this did work, and how this muscle of confidence is being built in this content, which many times, spew over into other contents that are related to math or the science that you have to take risk and try things and which builds upon what you have to do in life. And so how do we build confidence in our kids, understanding that they are coming in, hopeless many times, like defeated? Like, how do we do that?
Well, when I think about what you just stated, right? Like you come in every day, the fresh start. I think about the book by Harry Wong. I think it's like my first year teaching. I think every first year teacher's had this book, right?
Yeah, that's an oldie. That's a throwback.
7x11 landscape book, right? I think that one was a great book because, like he said, you can erase the board and start fresh again tomorrow, right? Whatever you tried and didn't work, forget about it, right? You got to have, I think they say it like a goldfish. You have a short memory or things like that. Like you just got to keep it moving. Let's start fresh. Let's try something new again. Maybe the lesson didn't work well. So no big deal. Let's keep going. I think it's also important to leverage your PLC, your professional learning community at your school, especially if you're all teaching the same content, right? If we're teaching the same resource and teaching it in different manners, and you're having success and I'm not, well, what are you doing differently than I did, right? And I think it's important to have those conversations. Now, don't get me wrong. Rules and procedures in the first week of school are extremely important. I learned that really quick, that I needed to have my rules posted, my procedures posted, making sure the students know what to do and know what the expectations are, because, they're coming into your classroom and they're going to feel you out. They're going to let you learn, like, what are you going to let me do? What are you not going to let me do? What can I get away with?
They're going to test the waters. They're going to test the boundaries.
Right? They're going to test you. And so you need to have all that put together and know how you're going to have those conversations when some of those challenging things arise. Now, to build that confidence with your students, again, we start fresh. If something doesn't work, we try again the next day. But it's important to have those conversations to inspire students. Like as we think about mathematical mastery, it's extremely important. And you need to let the students know that, right? Having that strong mathematical mindset and building that idea of becoming a problem solver is going to provide you with the skill set that's needed, especially as we think about the jobs in the future, right? Everything is changing. I can't remember, we said like 69% of the jobs don't even exist yet that these students are going to be working towards.
Yeah.
Right. And we think about science and technology, engineering, especially finance. Finance is a huge one these days, right? We think about our mathematical literacy, like that is our financial literacy. I'm sorry. That's another important component, right? In the past, we had checkbooks, everything's managed for you. But when you start thinking about purchasing a car, buying a house, interest rates are important. You might not think, 6%, whatever that means, but like those things mean a lot. And, you don't want to put yourself in financial purgatory at a young age because you didn't have a strong understanding of the mathematics and how things work. So that's why it's extremely important to have that strong mathematical background. But not only that, as an educator, making sure you're distilling that into your students to provide them with the understanding of why math is so important and essential in everyday life, especially as we think about it. Like I said, managing your finances to understanding how the world works. Like it's extremely important. And that's how you really build that confidence and you build that engagement as well. You let your students know, look, this is why you're going to need it. Because James, we always get that question. When am I ever going to use this? Right. And it's hard to answer that question because sometimes, there's certain concepts in math that it's just like, look, you got to learn this one because it's going to build to some other stuff. But as we get down the line, look, this is going to have direct connection to what you're going to be doing. Right?
Which then, again, like you were saying, build confidence because you feel like, I've seen this before. I can make these connections. I'm engaged. Like I like what I hear. A lot of what you're saying is this open mind to say, like, I'm in it with you. I'm in the trenches with you. Like I know great teachers are not sitting at their desk, you know what I'm saying? Not grading papers right then and there. They're in the process of probing their kids, asking them questions that's going to build connection, bringing out communication and discussion that's going to highlight what they see. Like you said, that which one doesn't belong. Like you said, low floor, high ceiling, right? Like everybody gets an entry point into this. And so even in that, it's building confidence that I have a voice. And one of the things that I really hear you as you describe great mathematical teaching is giving students voice. Like if I feel like I have a stake in this, if I feel like this matters not only to my teacher, but he shows me how it matters to me, first of all, I want to engage. And as I engage, and with great teachers that are able to bring out the mathematics and make the connections, as I'm engaging, then I'm going to start seeing that this makes sense. Like I always say this to my kids, like there are some days that I'm just like you said, you teach something, I'm like, y'all, it's going to be tedious today. It's going to be different steps, but it doesn't mean that you can't get to it. It's going to take us, the process is going to be a little longer today, but it's going to make sense while we're doing what we're doing. Okay. And so I love that because I hear that in you, and I hear that as you talk about that, which is going to lead me to like, and I feel like you said this, but what advice do you, as you're coaching teachers in this space, as you're coaching leaders, as you've been leading in this space for a while, what advice do you give to teachers and leaders as far as the mastery of mathematics?
Well, as we think about mathematics, right, you got to know your shifts in mathematics, right? The focus, the coherence, the rigor components, right? That's definitely going to help you have a better understanding of your content, right? Focus. What are my standards? What am I teaching today? What's the full extent of the standard? Am I teaching it all today or just doing a part like you're saying? And then we're going to get into a little bit more tomorrow, right? What's the within grade and beyond grade connections with that coherence piece? And then the aspects of rigor, right? You want to make sure that you're providing that procedural skill, that conceptual understanding, and the application. How are they going to actually be utilizing this in the real world?
Yeah.
As you start going into it and thinking about more beyond just the content, right? For our teachers, our facilitators, and our leaders, you know, the idea of creating a culturally responsive learning environment is huge, especially for our students that have diverse backgrounds, right? Diverse learning styles from each one of those students. It's important to provide those students with access to those quality resources and continuously assessing them and making those adjustments to your teaching methods along the way. You can't be set in your ways. Like, this is how I learned it. This is how they're going to learn it.
Yeah, you can say that again, Richard, because we all come in with a lens of how we learn math, and that is going to speak to many times to how we approach it, how we display it, what we expect from our students. So say it again so that we all can hear, Richard.
Again, like, you can't be set in your ways.
Yeah.
You got to be willing to adjust and adapt as teachers, right? You got to be willing to learn yourself, learn some different strategies, talk in your PLC, share what practices are working and what's not working, making sure that you're leveraging, you know, the great knowledge that's in your PLC, your fellow colleagues, your fellow teachers, you know, what's working, even going online and looking for videos of how things are taught. When I graduated college, I passed my calculus class, but I really did not have an understanding of how it made connections to the real world until I watched this calculus in 60-second video, and it blew my mind. I'm like, oh, that's why we learned this stuff. That's why we were looking at, you know, the instantaneous rate of change. It has straight connections to physics, you know, things like that. I wish I would have dived a little bit more deeper into my problem statistics classes, because I'd probably be doing a lot better in fantasy football than I am now, because statistics play a huge role in that as well if you start digging into the analytics. So, you know, it's the little things like that that you take for granted as, you know, a young up and coming educator, and you don't realize the impact that these things will have on you in turn having that impact on your students as well.
Yeah. I love that. I love you always land on know your content. Like that's the entry point. Like as I coach people, y'all, we got to know our content. Like we have to know that. And I know that's important, Richard, because I'm literally working with a district now of teachers, and they're struggling to teach. And a lot of it is because they don't know the content and how things are conceptually seen. So it's like this notion, like, I'm going to present math, I'm going to do a problem, we're going to do a problem, and then you're going to do the problem. But there's no conceptual understanding. There's no connection as to why. And so when I started to unpack for them, like, this is why this works. And this is why your kids, when you show them, they're going to be like, and it's going to be a different buy-in because I'm not mimicking you, you know what I'm saying? And so I love, that's where I start too, Richard. Like, and many times it is the issue that we sometimes see. And so I got two questions left for you, Richard, if we get to them. What would you want to change about the way mathematics is presented in this country, in your school, in your district? I wouldn't say your school, your district, because that makes it more personalized. But what, if anything, you would change about mathematics education?
I mean, I wouldn't change much about the content, right? Again, states are always going to move things around and make those adjustments. But just like we said, knowing your content, that's low hanging fruit, right? Like, that's not anything that you can't do on the weekend as you prepare, right? Actually lesson planning and doing the math yourself. And I think that right there is a detriment to this profession of mathematics, is the fact that we're not taking the time to do the math. I think it's NCTM, but the 5 practices for orchestrating math discussions. James, you might want to fact check me on that one. But again, anticipating, like, what are those misconceptions the students are going to make? What are the different entry points that the students are going to approach when they look at this problem? What are the different solution methods that the students are going to try to do? Like, what are the processes that they're going to attempt to do to solve this problem? And then how do you make those connections from one to the next? Which one is the foundational approach, right? Let's start with that one and then lead to the next one. And having that coherent connection from one strategy to the next, I think that's a huge piece. And even with that being said, again, it shouldn't be coming from you. It should be coming from the students. And to be honest with you, you might think a lot of those elementary things like turn-in talks and having math talks are things that only belong in the elementary. No, they work in the high school level as too. Like, you want to get engagement. You want your students to really buy in. Put your do now up on the board. After 5 minutes, say, okay, guys, go ahead and turn and talk with your neighbor. Explain how you did problem 1, right? Like, get the students talking about the mathematics. Because you'll be surprised at the students that will sit in the back of the classroom very quiet and not say anything, but they'll open right up and talk to their neighbors, right? So they'll be happy to share those conversations with the mathematics with their neighbor. And again, that gives that opportunity to show true mastery, right? Because they say, if you can, the way that you show true mastery of a concept is teach it to somebody else. So if I'm able to teach it, right, then I know that you have a strong understanding of it. And that's what's going to give our students that confidence and provide them that opportunity to have those math conversations. But again, you got to set the structure up for the students. It just doesn't happen overnight. It's not something that you're going to try to do on Monday and think it's going to hit. It might take 3 Mondays before it finally kicks in, right? You got to set those routines in place, and the students will learn what the expectations are, and they'll start to gravitate towards you, and you'll be surprised, because it's always the students that were the most challenging that are the ones that come back to you after 3 years, after you had them freshman year. They come back to you as a senior, and they won't leave you alone, right? They're your favorite, you're their favorite teacher, because you really put your neck out there for them. You really tried, and they can tell when you really care about the students.
And most of all, that's exactly, they know that you're pushing them because you care about them. And despite and I've definitely learned that too, Richard, like, despite the pushback that they may give me at that time, they know, they have internalized, like, he believes in me probably more than somebody else, because they don't push me, because they don't ask me, they don't have expectations for me. And because they don't, I unconsciously know they don't really care. And they may do care, but it's not shown to me. And so one of the things that I really take back on what you're saying about mathematics teaching is that giving students voice, you got to give space for them to talk, give space for them to make connections, give space to them to talk to their neighbors, to share their brilliance, because of the fact that we believe in them. And if you believe that they're learning, if you believe that they're intelligent and they're brilliant and they can make connections, then you're going to give space for them to actually do that. So I know I grew up in a space and in classrooms where you were not allowed to talk. We sat in rows and the teacher did all the talking and you raise your hand. And that not saying that structure is not necessary, because I hear you saying we need structure, but we also need structure on how we're going to get the brilliance out of our kids through these conversations, which is also something that we need. And I definitely co-sign on you on that, Richard. And so this leads me, I love your passion. It comes out clear. It is precise as far as what you believe. It is honed. And so what is your personal mission as it relates to mathematics teaching? What is this driving force? Why do you want to do this work? Why do you do this work with the passion and intensity that you do it?
Well, my personal mission really is the advancement of education, right? Especially in mathematics for all of our students, right? We really want to promote access and equity and making sure that all students have access to high quality instructional materials, and making sure that, we advocate for our teachers as much as we can around different teaching methods that's going to really meet the needs of all of our students. The work that we do at Standards Institute by far is a great opportunity to make those connections with teachers that are willing to learn, right? It's the coalition of the willing, right? They want to do better. They're there to do better. And we need to make sure that we're providing them that opportunity as instructors, as facilitators, to show them these different teaching practices, to show them the different ways or the different approaches to teaching and learning, right? We want to believe that every student has the potential to excel in mathematics. And again, the way that we do that is by providing our students with those necessary resources that are fully aligned to the standards, that provide those shifts in mathematics, and that are going to help to support those students achieve that mathematical success.
I hear the personal mission, buddy. We want all our kids to learn math and be passionate about it. And I'm glad to have colleagues like yourself in this space to support educators as we need to, as far as our mindset work, as far as our pedagogical work, like what are the instructional materials, the high quality materials, what are the instructional moves that need to take place, what is the mindset that we need to have as it relates to making sure that all our kids are able to achieve mastery in mathematics. So I appreciate your heart. I appreciate your work. I appreciate most of all your expertise as it relates to mastering mathematics. So again, Richard, is math a racist subject?
Again, I don't think it's a racist subject. I think that those social biases definitely come into play and definitely make an impact on the instruction that our students receive, right? Those preconceived notions that we have about our Black and brown students are definitely those mindsets that need to be shifted and changed in order to make sure that we're meeting the needs of all students. Because if you can meet the needs of the historically or the historically marginalized students that have historically not been successful, then why is it not going to work for everybody, right? So those are really the mindsets and the approaches that we need to take with mathematics.
I love it. Well, everybody, you heard it from Richard. Math is not a racist subject. How we approach it with our biases have shown us that we don't necessarily believe that everybody can have success with it. But if we tackle our own biases and our own practices, we will see all of our kids mastering mathematics. This is episode 8 of his math racist subject. I appreciate you, Richard, for coming on, sharing your brilliance. And hopefully you all got, well, I know without a shadow of a doubt that you got some nuggets, some jewels, some all that good stuff from my brother today. So everybody have a great and wonderful day. We'll see you next time.
Have a good one, Jay.
Listen, I hope you got everything you needed from this episode. If you did, please like, share, subscribe, do what you got to do to get this message out. As we talk about getting the message out, I would love to extend the offer to work with you and your teachers, whether it be a speaker, whether it be professional development, consulting, or even coaching. I am about that mastery for all life. So I want to extend that offer to you. My information is on the screen. But above all else, I'm super excited that you had space enough to welcome me into wherever you're listening to me at, all right? So I'm super excited that you decided to join me. Today. Have an amazing day.